truth is the most convincing story that maps onto reality, and that's why the central narrative is falling apart.
Right now in the United States, people should not be walking around with masks.
We must see the central narrative for the fiction that it is. We are Americans.
While elections are sometimes messy, this was a secure election.
The founders began the fight for human liberty and self-governance, and it's up to us to finish the job.
I'll tell you what, we are in a truth emergency right now.
This is the end game.
It's Thursday, October 24th, 2024, the 1,373rd day of dystopia. I'm your moderator, Chris Paul. Let's be reasonable. A warm welcome and hello to all of you listening to the podcast through a paid subscription at imyourmoderator.substack.com. You can become a paid subscriber for as little as $50 a year or $5 a month. And in doing so, you will get the ad-free experience. You'll be able to participate in the conversation over on Substack, and you'll be invited to the interactive live stream every Wednesday afternoon. And if you can't or you simply don't want to, continue listening to the free version on Substack, a wide variety of podcast platforms, and of course, Rumble. All I ask is that you share it with your friends. You can find the links to the podcast, the writing, the social media, and the merch site by checking the show notes or visiting linktree.com/I'mYourModerator. Anyone who understands the roller coaster we've been on these past few years knows we haven't reached the end yet, and there may still be hard times to come. And as we add $1 trillion to the national debt every 100 days, we could be headed for some shaky financial times. If you're like me, you're figuring out how to diversify and make sure some seeds are planted for whatever may come. And that's one of the many reasons I think Bitcoin is part of our future. But it's not only about money. Bitcoin looks to be a critical part of the next generation of technology, communications, energy, verification, and even national defense. I'd encourage everyone to do their research and do it now. And if you're convinced of the likelihood that Bitcoin is an essential part of our future, then you'll need an on-ramp. I recommend River. River empowers you to grow your portfolio without any unwanted surprises and eliminates third-party custodians, putting you in control of your assets. Open an account with no minimum purchase requirement. You can get your Bitcoin journey started with just $1. Visit partner.river.com/reasonable to create your River account today. That's partner.river.com/reasonable. Now, I know that many of you out there understand the need to diversify assets, or maybe you're looking to protect your retirement savings, but you're not quite there yet on Bitcoin, and you feel better about precious metals. I get that too. I think going in multiple directions is wise, and I do that myself. And when it comes to buying precious metals, you want to be working with a good company, and that's why I've partnered with Goldco. Goldco is a 6-time Inc. 5000 winner, 2022 Company of the Year, and they've helped people like you and me place over $2 billion in gold and silver. And I have gotten silver from Goldco. And right now they're offering my supporters up to $10,000 in bonus silver while supplies last. Don't pass this offer up. Go to reasonablegold.com now. This is your opportunity to protect you and your family from an out-of-control government before it's too late. So don't wait a second longer. Take action today. Click on the link in the podcast notes or go to reasonablegold.com now and get your free gold kit, your free IRA kit. You'll be glad you did. All right, so yesterday on the live stream, we spent most of the discussion talking about how Donald Trump is apparently literally Hitler. The news just broke Tuesday night about what was in a book that was published 2 years ago. And in the Donald Trump is literally Hitler story in The Atlantic, and there was a companion story from the New York Times. They talked about the murder of Vanessa Guillen at Fort Hood in 2020, the Suckers and Losers hoax from 2020, and of course, the claims in the Peter Baker and Susan Glasser book from 2022. These were their October surprises, and because those didn't really have the impact they were intended to have, probably because they're years-old fake news, they also threw out a brand new 31-year-old claim about how Donald Trump had groped a woman who was a young model at the time, apparently in the presence of Jeffrey Epstein. And naturally, that ridiculous piece of fake news was refuted within minutes. Consider what sort of ammo they have left if these are the attack points, if these are the October surprises. Now, we'll come back to the literally Hitler stuff in just a few minutes, but first I want to spend some time on our fake elections. This is Michigan Attorney General Dana Nessel on MSNBC, and just a little hat tip to my friends Patriots in Control for supplying some of the clips in today's show.
But what we've done since that time is we are allowing for early processing of the ballots, and that means that, it's not that the votes will be counted, it's that the ballots will be processed, several days early before the election, which should allow for election results to come back a little sooner. But I think it's important to note that not all communities have decided to pre-process. And in fact, the city of Warren, which is the third largest city in the state of Michigan, has elected not to pre-process. So results are not going to come in immediately after the election, but they should come in much quicker than before. We've already had 1.3 million absentee ballots that have been, received by their clerks. So I do see the results coming in faster than they have in the past as a result, but it's not going to be immediate. And we know we can see this trend that Democrats tend to vote earlier, either during the early voting process or by absentee, whereas Republicans are more likely to vote on election day.
Okay.
But, it doesn't, none of that makes the results inaccurate.
Right, exactly, which is why we're discussing what the process is here to make expectations accordingly.
Now, that is quite a clip, and I might as well just start with the end. The woman who reads the teleprompter at MSNBC just admitted that the reason she's having Dana Nessel on to tell the audience about how some cities are pre-processing and some aren't, but none of this stuff that sounds inconsistent and like they're obviously manipulating the process should be seen as weird at all. That's why MSNBC is having these Democrats around the country come on TV and explain that no matter what happens in the elections, everything's just fine. Whatever result we give is going to be the perfect result. And because it's a perfect result, there's no point in challenging it, so we're not going to let you. It's strange, isn't it, that the media is making sure we all know that the election will be free and fair, safe and secure, and that the reported results will accurately reflect the will and intent of the voters when the election hasn't happened? They have no idea what's going to happen. Why are they telling us what's going to happen? Why are they telling us everything is going to be okay? They can't possibly know that. And recent history suggests overwhelmingly that's not true. The media is protecting the election apparatus. But let's get to the substance of Nessel's claims. She said that they were going to be pre-processing ballots, and this is supposed to be a good thing because it makes the counting process easier on election day. We used to be able to just count ballots, hand-marked paper ballots, in small precincts and get the results, but now they have changed the process around completely. They have centralized everything, and they've made the process vastly more complicated. All of those complications slow down the process, but here's the good news. If you just use voting machines and electronic tabulators and electronic poll books and report electronically, well, that's going to speed everything up. Of course, it doesn't do that. It doesn't only fail to give us the results in a timely manner. Here we are 4 years later with no verification whatsoever that the results the machines produced in 2020 were accurate. Not only is their election system incapable of producing legitimate results and therefore incapable of producing legitimate representatives, It's incapable of performing the one function that we're told necessitates these complications in the first place, which is that we get fast results. I'm not even sure we have any results. We just have numbers that someone told us and then said, yeah, those are them. Don't ask. Here is what pre-processing entails in Michigan. Opening the mail-in envelopes containing absentee ballots, verifying voter signatures on the outer envelopes, comparing the stub number on the envelope with the numbers on the ballot, removing ballots from envelopes while keeping them in their secrecy sleeves, flattening ballots to prepare them for tabulation, scanning ballots through tabulators, but not counting votes. And Dana Nessel made sure to note that they were just pre-processing. There would be no counting because the law says they have to count all the votes on election day. So they're doing everything but counting. And when they say they're not counting, they mean they're not officially counting the ballots in a way that will put that count as part of the final tally. But they're definitely recording which ballots come in. They're verifying the signatures, so that means they know who voted. And of course, that's the part that really matters. So when Dana Nessel tells the public that they're not counting the votes, what she's trying to get the audience to understand is that they don't know what the results are. They don't know the score. But that's a lie. They do have some rough estimate of the score. They have an added level of protection, aka deception, called a secrecy sleeve. This is supposed to protect the privacy of the vote because, of course, we have a secret ballot. Yet another deranged farce where we have been indoctrinated with the inverted belief that the secret ballot is somehow a good thing. People are deciding how power should be wielded over their fellow man in ways they're not even courageous enough to support publicly. But let's just spend a minute on this. This is from Michigan.gov. This is the Election Officials Manual, Chapter 8, Absent Voter Ballot Processing. This is the ballot verification section. After the absent voter ballot envelope has been verified at either an AVCB or a polling place, the election inspector should open the absent voter ballot envelope. Without exposing any votes, the election inspector must verify that the number on the ballot stub agrees with the ballot number on the face of the absent voter return envelope. So the humans are supposed to perform this process without, quote unquote, exposing votes. And you can imagine that if you asked a Michigan election official, isn't it possible for them to see the votes? They would say, we have processes in place to prevent that, which is essentially just they tell people not to do that. If a ballot was returned in a secrecy envelope, the ballot and secrecy envelope may be removed from the return envelope to make the comparison. If the ballot was not returned in a secrecy envelope, the election inspector should first verify that the ballot was folded by the voter so that the votes are concealed before removing the ballot from the return envelope to make the comparison. If the ballot must be placed in a secrecy envelope, the election inspector must take care placing the ballot into a secrecy sleeve to avoid exposing any votes cast on the ballot. So it's totally possible that they just look at the votes and count the votes. Not officially, just in a scorekeeping way. But they don't do it because they're told not to. It's the most important information anyone could have when strategizing the last 2 weeks of a campaign, but they don't do it because it says not to. And when they do it, they didn't mean to. As always, very safe, very secure. Now, why is the third biggest city in Michigan not pre-processing the ballots like other places are? In California, Gavin Newsom just signed that bill a few weeks ago, making it so that localities in California couldn't require voter ID anywhere because you wouldn't want counties or cities coming up with their own rules about how elections work. Except, of course, they do that too, like in New York, where they tried to make it legal for non-citizens to vote in municipal elections. But for some reason, their third biggest city has different policies than number 1 and number 2. I suppose it would be hard to explain going into overtime on number 1 and number 2 due to mail-in ballots if you're pre-processing those mail-in ballots leading up to Election Day. But it'll be easy to explain going deep into overtime in Warren because they didn't do the pre-processing. So in the biggest cities, they get the pre-processing done, they know the score, and then in the third biggest city, they don't do the pre-processing. Everything begins on Election Day, and then they have the opportunity to go into overtime there. So you get the advantage of pre-processing and you get the advantage of overtime. No one would buy it if you had pre-processing and overtime in the same place. Arizona also has a ballot pre-processing system, but Arizona's also the reigning champion of elections that go deep into overtime. And to be honest, that's a bit unfair. California takes as long as they want. But people don't generally hear about California's elections because everyone is so convinced that California is a deep, deep blue state that its elections are ignored. Despite having probably the most illegitimate election results in the country, if not the world. California's elections are a joke. It would be less insulting to the people of California if they simply stopped having them so people could save their time and stop being talked down to. Former Trump spokesperson Liz Harrington posted this yesterday on Telegram with the caption, "Maricopa County says it will take 10 to 13 days to count the votes in 2024. They really think we're stupid."
Very tight races here. In fact, Maricopa County is setting the stage that tabulating all these votes may not be an election night thing. It may take days.
Wow. Well, 12 News journalist Colleen Sikora explains that county leaders are asking voters for patience and to be prepared.
Tight races, high interest in the election, and a two-page ballot are leaving Maricopa County officials warning of lines on Election Day and also warning it's going to take them 10 to 13 days to tabulate results. 2 pages and an average of 79 contests per ballot.
We are expecting heavy turnout this year, and so that's why we're really encouraging people to vote early.
2 weeks out from Election Day, and some votes are in.
More than 400,000 people have cast their ballot in Maricopa County.
That's out of an anticipated 2.1 million voter turnout this year.
We are seeing a little bit of a lag of where we were in 2020, but the last few days we've actually seen an uptick in turnout. So I am expecting that we will start approaching very close to those 2020 numbers.
What can impact the amount of results released and when? Early ballots dropped off on Election Day.
Our races will be close.
And on Election Day, lines are expected, even with an increase in vote centers and voting booths at those vote centers.
If you're going to vote on Election Day, vote in person and use that on-site tabulator so that those votes will be tabulated on that evening as opposed to dropping off your early ballot on Election Day.
The county adding more high-speed tabulators, more election workers.
We're increasing staffing at our ballot processing as well because, again, we're handling double the number of the sheets of paper. And so we are looking to both have extra shifts, night shifts, if necessary, in ballot processing and then in the next step that takes place in election administration, and that's through tabulation.
But tabulation expected to take time.
We do expect that it will take between 10 and 13 days to complete tabulation.
Now, the man in that clip who wasn't the teleprompter reader for Channel 12 News, that was Maricopa County Board of Supervisors member Bill Gates, one of the people at the center of the 2020 controversy. He just suggested that people go vote on the computer screens, the electronic tabulators, if they go for in-person Election Day voting, rather than dropping off their early ballots that day because that's going to force them to go into overtime. And overtime could be 10 to 13 days long. That's going to really screw things up. Aaron Mishkin, the head of the decision desk at Fox News, told Politico that the over-under is Saturday, which was when the call was made last time. And yep, it sure was. 4 days after the election, the television told us who won. But what if we can't get an Arizona result for 10 to 13 days? I mean, Arizona is a battleground state. This is a very close, very real election. It could be that no one gets over 270, and everybody's just going to be waiting on Arizona for 10 to 13 days. And who knows? Maybe longer. What if it's a month? What if it's 2 months? What if it's 3 months and we don't know who won the very real election on November 5th? Now, it's funny because people have a knee-jerk reaction to think, oh, that's terrible. But is that terrible? I don't think it's terrible. First off, I think it would be hilarious. And the reason for that is because it's so preposterous that it will only help people understand that our elections are fake. They're not rigged a little bit. They're not stolen around the margins. They're not just manipulated by the media. They're not just interfered with by foreign countries. They're fake. Now, I don't expect it'll take that long, but even 10 to 13 days is great. I mean, it's not so good if you are groveling and trembling and have crippling anxiety over who the TV says is your next God King. But if you ever want to have legitimate elections in this country, that's great. They already did a trial run of this playbook back in 2022 in the Kari Lake election. Days and days and days, we were told this many ballots are coming in. No, it's this many. No, it's this many. And when they finally decided to let us know the results, Katie Hobbs had just slipped past Kari Lake by a mere 17,000 votes. Abe Hamadeh lost by a couple hundred. But besides that, Republicans basically kicked ass. It was a very real election, very safe, very secure, very real. Katie Hobbs is a very real governor. Now, during that period, while they were trying to figure out a way to substantiate the Katie Hobbs victory they would eventually have to support, the national news media ran interference, calling any problem with the Arizona process a conspiracy theory. And that included all your favorite Con Inc. superheroes at the Daily Weimar and The Blaze and Fox News, all of the DeSantis simps, etc. All of those people out there blaming Donald Trump and MAGA candidates for the failure of the red wave to appear. That media effort was very effective because people still locked into that mainstream media environment, people who are, I guess, fooled by the guise of independent media at organizations like the Daily Weimar, they're easily led to believe that all the claims about rigged and stolen elections are conspiracy theories because they get information from authority and they're incentivized not to break consensus publicly. Kari Lake is extremely popular among MAGA. She's popular among Republicans generally in Arizona. But the narrative battle over that time was won, as usual, through the collusion of the media on both sides of the uniparty. And it's no slight to Kari Lake to say that no matter how popular she is, she's no Donald Trump. She's not nearly as popular as Donald Trump. She wasn't as popular as Donald Trump back in 2022, and Donald Trump is more popular than he has ever been right now. So think about that Arizona situation in 2022, focused on Donald Trump against Kamala Harris rather than Kari Lake against Katie Hobbs. The eyes of the nation have been focused on this fake campaign for 2 years, which is probably one of the reasons why Donald Trump started the campaign season earlier than it's ever been started. He may also have wanted to preempt any other announcements, particularly because the Ron DeSantis op sprung into action just before those midterms and then told the nation immediately after them, look how well Ron DeSantis and Brian Kemp and Greg Abbott did compared to all of the MAGA candidates. Donald Trump, his chosen candidates, and his supporters lost this election for the Republican Party. What we need to do is return to the establishment. The 2024 campaign season began before the 2022 election even happened, followed by Trump officially announcing right after. And on the live stream yesterday, we talked about Dan Scavino reminding everyone of that. He said, I have zero interest in working with anyone who is a former colleague that disappeared upon our departure from the White House and was nowhere to be found when DJT announced his candidacy on 11/15/22, or was silent throughout 2023. Stop calling, stop emailing, stop texting. You're not hearing back from me. So perhaps it's all kayfabe. Otherwise, it seems like Donald Trump had that entire Con Inc. op dead to rights and beat them all to the punch. But the point is, the nation has been paying attention to this Donald Trump re-election cycle for almost 2 years now. Every part of the political conversation has had to take that into account. Donald Trump is the subject of the TV shows and the podcasts and the news all day, every day. He's now deeply embedded in pop culture. His presence is ubiquitous and unavoidable. And because he's so divisive, he is the divider in chief, which is a good thing, as I argued in a podcast by that name in August. Everyone has an opinion about him. They either want to see him succeed or they want to see him fail. Everyone's tuned in. They're expecting November 5th to be the biggest day in the history of our country. Donald Trump says it's going to be Liberation Day. But what if we don't get any results for 10 days or 13 days or 30 days or 90 days? What if we never get any results? We still haven't gotten results from 2020, not legitimate, verifiable results. We still don't even have access to the final report from the Maricopa County forensic audit. There are so many unplayed cards in Trump's hand. But what if we don't get any results? They're going to have to wait for the results, whatever the regime has planned for that post-election period. And of course, they planned for it, just like they did in 2020 with the Transition Integrity Project. They did another one of those this year. Well, they're going to have to wait to activate those plans. And perhaps this was the case in 2020 as well. So the entire country's eyes will be on this election on November 5th and after November 5th, no matter how long it takes. Now, maybe the results come out on November 5th. We have an answer and the next phase begins immediately, but it kind of sounds like maybe it's going to take a while. And as the time wears on, some of that energy and anxiety that will have been built up will begin to dissipate, and people will start getting into the minutia of how the election processes actually work. Why isn't Michigan done counting votes? Why isn't Arizona done counting votes? Why don't we have an election result? We're continually told this is a close race. People are starting to discover that it really isn't. Kamala Harris bombed another town hall last night. There are all sorts of rumors online about stories coming out that will end Kamala Harris's political career. Now, I don't know if that's real or not, but it's not outside the realm of possibility. What would happen then? Do they try to replace her? Do they say the fake election is canceled? But assuming this goes all the way through November 5th, what happens if there are no results? I would suggest that the national media is not just going to be able to run cover for the uniparty election system throughout that entire period the way they did in 2022 with the Arizona governor's race. The national audience largely ignored it. The people who are addicted to political television paid lots of attention because they wanted confirmation throughout each and every one of those days that everything was just fine. The election system is just fine. Katie Hobbs is going to win. It's not going to be Carrie Lake. It's not that very dangerous MAGA candidate. She's going to lose just like all those other MAGA candidates lost. Remember Dr. Oz? He lost to a vaccine-injured Frankenstein who needed a computer to speak and hear. Fox News and The Blaze and Daily Weimar and Dave Rubin and Tucker Carlson and Megyn Kelly, they're not going to be able to come out saying that the uniparty's election apparatus is A-OK. MSNBC and CNN will. They'll try to shut down conversation. There'll be more pushes for censorship on the internet. But in that scenario, that story would play out in front of the entire country with everyone paying attention day and night. And while that's playing out in Arizona, it's going to be playing out in all the other states as well, whether or not they have submitted their results. People are understanding now that it's not a close race. They're definitely going to understand that in another 2 weeks. So by all means, commies, take all the time you want to count your fake votes in your fake election while the country watches your entire system collapse. Last night, Donald Trump was giving a speech at a Turning Point event, and he posted a clip of that speech on Truth Social last night.
So we are running against the most radical, most incompetent, most unfit vice president in the history of our country. No one respects her. No one trusts her. No one takes her seriously. This is a woman who took yesterday off. How do you take yesterday off? You got 13 days. You're running for the presidency. She takes her time off. I've gone 52 days in a row, and I'm not taking any days off, that I can tell you. No, but think of that. She's taking days off at levels not seen. I hear she's taking another one tomorrow or something. It's the craziest thing I've ever seen. Maybe she knows something we don't know. That's bad, right? Maybe she knows something we don't know. Does everybody understand that? Maybe. She takes a day to study for a simple interview with an MSDNC reporter, but then makes a fool of herself with answers that are so crazy. And we'll never forget 60 Minutes. We're never going to forget it. We can't. I think I'm going to sue them, actually, because Because there's no way they can answer it. There's no way they can say, no, we don't like the answer she gave, and they immediately replace it with something. There's no way they can answer that. But we are not running against Kamala. She means nothing. She is purely a vessel. She can't put two sentences together. She can't do it. Just like we were not running against crooked Joe Biden, who, by the way, said yesterday about me, quote, "We got to lock him up." I told you. He said, then he denied it. I didn't mean that. Because he's not legally allowed to say. He can't say that. But I've been telling you that. It's election interference. This is all it is. He said, we got to lock him up. This is illegal and should cause cases. I mean, look, think of it. I've been under investigation more than the legendary Alphonse Capone, Scarface. And my parents are looking down, and my father was tough. And my mother was great. She was so sweet. And I said yesterday, I know she's in heaven. I'm not 100% sure of my father, but he was a good man. He's a tough guy and a good guy. He had a big heart, too. And he was smart. He was smart. But they're looking down on me now, and they're saying, how the hell could my son be worse than Alphonse Capone? How could he be? No, but these are crooked people. This is all election interference. And you know the amazing thing? It made me much more popular. It's crazy, right? Because the people got it. Crazy. But as I've said, these lawsuits are being run by the Department of Justice, the FBI. Biden is behind it all, believe it or not. And he proved that yesterday with his stupid statement. And people are outraged by it. And we're running against something far bigger, far more powerful than them, which is a massive, vicious, crooked, radical left machine that runs today's Democrat Party. It's far bigger than them. This is who we're fighting, and we're fighting them hard. These are the people who are doing such harm to our country with their open borders and record-setting inflation and the Green New scam. They're trying to destroy our country. But we're not going to let it happen any longer. We are going to have the biggest victory in the history of our country on November 5th.
Now, there's a lot there. Trump went on a couple of tangents, but in his post on Truth Social, he kind of winnowed that down. He wrote, "We are running against the most radical, most incompetent, most unfit vice president in history. No one respects her. No one trusts her. No one takes her seriously. But we are not running against Kamala. She means nothing. She is purely a vessel. We are running against something far bigger and far more powerful than them, which is a massive, vicious, crooked, radical left machine that runs today's Democrat Party." And I would suggest that that radical left machine is the global communist regime superstructure that runs countries all around the world through their intelligence apparatus, through the manipulation of their propaganda media, their use of censorship, their manipulation of reputations for the individual, for entities, for organizations, through corruption and compromise, through blackmail, through financial manipulation and sanctions, because, of course, they've always controlled the currency, the fiat currency they can make up out of nothing. And then ultimately, they always had the military behind them, most particularly Team America World Police. I believe that's the machine they're referring to, not Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton. He said quite clearly he's not running against Kamala. He's not running against Joe. And I know it's a euphemism. But we're also having a fake campaign for a fake election. So how euphemistic is it, really? No one respects her. No one trusts her. No one takes her seriously. But we are not running against Kamala. She means nothing. She is purely a vessel. Does it sound like Donald Trump thinks this is a close race? Does he sound like he's worried about offending the communists, no matter what they say about him on television? They were on TV pretending he was a Nazi and molesting girls with Jeffrey Epstein, and their narrative operation is so weak and so fully exposed now that he doesn't even have to worry about it. If any of this stuff was true, it would be damning. It would be a big deal to everyone, but it's not true. And it was already parsed years ago. So they're left talking about how he's unhinged and unstable, panicking over every mention of the enemy from within. And I discussed all of this Trump is literally Hitler, Trump is a fascist stuff yesterday on the live stream. But you have to understand that when Donald Trump is back to being publicly recognized as the legitimate American president, the efforts toward accountability will be reframed as Donald Trump, the authoritarian dictator who has seized power, is using his control over the military to suppress dissent, oppress the people, and target the people based on identity characteristics. If he were to go after Hillary Clinton and her ilk, they would say he's targeting women. If he goes after Kamala, he's targeting minority women. If he goes after Obama, he'll be targeting minority gay men. If he goes after Michelle Obama, he'll be targeting minority trans people. And naturally, we're going to hear over and over and over again about how he's targeting Jews. None of that will be about their identity. What's happening now is a lead up to pushing that narrative. It's all seeding. They know what's coming. We've been talking about this exact dynamic for a year. Donald Trump can be the opposite of Hitler, the opposite of a fascist, as I went into at great length yesterday, and they will still try to make him into that character. That's what the playbook calls for. I don't want this to be repetitive for the paid subscribers, but I do want to return to this post we discussed yesterday. I posted this on Telegram and Truth Social. Fascism is a far-left, collectivist, ideological descendant of Marxism, characterized by collusion between the state and industry to amass all societal power in a centralized totalitarian authority. It cannot, therefore, be far-right, ever. Fascism has no characteristics that can be described as far-right, which moves toward individualism and anarchy, not authoritarian collectivism. There is no way to consider Donald Trump a fascist. It's ridiculous, even under the false understanding of fascism as somehow far-right. How was fascism rebranded as far-right? Ask the neoconservatives, ideological descendants of Trotsky. In their role as controlled opposition, they rebranded themselves, actual fascists, as somehow on the right by using the word conservative and promoting globalism by co-opting the evangelical movement. It's not mysterious. It's the playbook. It's not possible to have a right-wing collectivist ideology. You cannot be a far-right fascist. Nothing about Donald Trump, the person or the president, suggests that Donald Trump is any kind of collectivist. He has not attempted to centralize power. He is not militaristic. He doesn't divide by race, though they pretend otherwise. Not that that's necessarily a requirement of fascism. And of course, the people know better, which is why people of minority ethnicities are coming toward Donald Trump in droves rather than screaming their lungs out about how he's racist. The mainstream media tried to bring back the Central Park 5 hoax this week. That fell flat. None of this is working. Even John Kelly's comments were absurd. We went through the CNN article yesterday, just a piece of that. The newspaper reported that in a recorded interview, Kelly was asked whether the former president met the definition of a fascist and responded by reading aloud a definition he'd found online. Well, looking at the definition of fascism, it's a far-right, authoritarian, ultra-nationalist political ideology and movement characterized by a dictatorial leader, centralized autocracy, militarism, forcible suppression of opposition, belief in a natural social hierarchy. So certainly, in my experience, those are the kinds of things that he thinks would work better in terms of running America. He went on, certainly the president is in the far-right area. He's certainly an authoritarian, admires people who are dictators. He has said that. So he certainly falls into the general definition of fascist for sure. So those are John Kelly's damning comments. That's the proof right there that Donald Trump is a fascist. John Kelly had to look up the definition of fascism before laying out that damning evidence of his opinion. Now, again, that's not even a correct definition of fascism, but Donald Trump doesn't actually fit any of the characteristics Kelly just described either. So why are they doing this? What is going on here? I played the clip of the fake vice president pretending to be the fake president, coming outside the White House and speaking at a podium with a seal on it. She delivered a 3-minute speech about how Donald Trump was a fascist and all of this is very dangerous, and then retreated without taking questions. But let's take a listen again to the first part of this.
So yesterday we learned that Donald Trump's former chief of staff, John Kelly, a retired 4-star general, confirmed that while Donald Trump was president, he said he wanted generals like Adolf Hitler had. Donald Trump said that because he does not want a military that is loyal to the United States Constitution. He wants a military that is loyal to him. He wants a military who will be loyal to him personally, one that will obey his orders even when he tells them to break the law or abandon their oath to the Constitution of the United States. In just the past week, Donald Trump has repeatedly called his fellow Americans the enemy from within, and even said that he would use the United States military to go after American citizens. And let's be clear about who he considers to be the enemy from within. Anyone who refuses to bend a knee or dares to criticize him would qualify, in his mind, as the enemy within, like judges, like journalists, like nonpartisan election officials. It is deeply troubling and incredibly dangerous that Donald Trump would invoke Adolf Hitler, the man who is responsible for the deaths of 6 million Jews and hundreds of thousands of Americans. All of this is further evidence for the American people of who Donald Trump really is.
So the breaking news was that John Kelly confirmed his comments that were put in a book published 2 years ago. It's nice that she said that clearly, while still pretending there was some breaking news element to any of this. But they are really focused on the comments about the military. What Donald Trump said was that it's possible that the National Guard or the military might have to protect the country after the 5th of November if we see what was expected, what was planned for back in 2020, what they practiced throughout the summer of love. We're being told to prepare for another long lockdown of the Capitol in Washington, D.C., just like 2020. We're told it will very likely start before the 6th of January 2025, and it will extend past the inauguration. Who knows how long it will extend? The Capitol was locked down while Joe Biden was quote-unquote president. What was up with that? We never really got an explanation. It was just a reaction to the very violent insurrection. They used the military on the streets of America, didn't they? Who were they defending against? As I said the other day, they labeled their political opponent and everyone who supports their political opponent as the enemies within. They said we were all threats to democracy. We were such threats to democracy, we can't even talk amongst ourselves online. That's how dangerous we are. Donald Trump has used the enemies within framing a number of times now, often at rallies, but he also said it to Maria Bartiromo on Fox News, and that's what set off all the panic and mania that we have watched over the last couple of weeks. Here's that clip again.
Let's remember, you've got 50,000 Chinese nationals in this country in the last couple of years. Yeah. You have people on the terrorist watch list, 350 in the last couple of years. You got, like you said, 13,000 murderers and 15,000 rapists. Right. What are you expecting? Joe Biden said he doesn't think it's going to be a peaceful election day.
Well, he doesn't have any idea what's happening in all fairness. He spends most of his day sleeping. I think the bigger problem is the enemy from within. Not even the people that have come in and destroying our country. By the way, totally destroying our country. The towns, the villages, they're being inundated. But I don't think they're the problem in terms of election day. I think the bigger problem are the people from within. We have some very bad people. We have some sick people, radical left lunatics. And I think they're and it should be very easily handled by, if necessary, by National Guard, or if really necessary, by the military, because they can't let that happen.
We're supposed to believe that sounds like an authoritarian dictator who wants to use the military and turn the military against The American people, the ones who just happen to disagree with Donald Trump, the ones who refuse to bend the knee? That's not what that sounds like. It doesn't sound like that at all. But let's step back from the traditional framing as we've understood it in America, as we've been indoctrinated into it, as we've been led to believe the United States of America is one thing. We have a government, we have a president, and that president is the commander-in-chief of our military. When that president tells the military what to do, they'll do it, no matter what. We're told there is civilian control over the military. That is the president's role. He doesn't have to be a military man. He is elected, and then he is the commander-in-chief of the military. But the thing is, in all the other countries around the world that we can study, the ones the global regime is trying to overthrow, the reports we can read from the International Crisis Group and these other globalist think tanks that guide the negotiations, the planning, and the execution of those plans designed to overthrow governments and replace leaders, something they've been doing for decades, if not centuries. In all those instances, it really matters where the military stands. Is Kamala Harris, the fake vice president, suggesting that Donald Trump is going to be able to control the National Guard and the military on November 5th on quote-unquote election day? How's he going to do that if he's not president? Is she suggesting he's going to seize power by stealing an election? I mean, that's what they say. That's the only way Donald Trump is going to come back into power, by basically overthrowing the system on his own. We heard the other day about how he's going to use constitutional means to do it, of course, but that still counts as an overthrow. As far as these people are concerned, it counts as a coup. Is she suggesting that the military is just going to allow a coup to happen? Donald Trump is going to rise to power in an unconstitutional manner, and then the military is just going to follow Donald Trump and do his bidding, even if his bidding is targeting the American people, anyone who dissents from the MAGA agenda? That seems kind of strange, doesn't it? To be honest, it seems kind of disrespectful when it comes to the military. And of course, the fake vice president and the fake president and the fake administration have had a strange relationship with the military throughout this entire period. They're very close to the Pentagon. They're very close to the military-industrial complex, but they never seem to have any idea of what the military's doing. We watched the Afghanistan debacle, but aside from reporting that they are sending regime fiat money all over the world to support various war efforts, and claiming that later on down the road they're going to send really old weapons and equipment to the supposed battlefield in Ukraine and in Israel, the military hasn't done much of anything. Are we really expected to believe that that's just because Russia hasn't technically violated NATO's Article 5? Why aren't we defending that very important sovereign democracy in Ukraine with the full force of our military? Russia staged a brutal invasion, and if Ukraine falls, they're going to take over all of Europe. And Israel had to deal with the paragliding go-kart incident. That was their 9/11, and they're our greatest allies. The only actual support we provided them was that we built a pier that then collapsed into the water. None of this is meant to be a knock on the military. It just seems like they could have and would have made a big difference if Biden had sent them in to protect our very important allies. Now, I've talked about this a number of times. The level of military control by the illegitimate Biden regime seems to be nil. But the TV says otherwise, and we are supposed to pretend that Joe Biden is a real president, and as real president, he would have full control over that military, so long as he was asking them to execute lawful orders. Turning them against innocent American civilians would not seem to fall under that category. I think it's awfully strange for a vice president to suggest that the military is going to allow someone to rise to power in an unconstitutional fashion and then obey all of that person's orders. But that's what she's doing when it comes to Donald Trump. And it's strange because Joe Biden rose to power unconstitutionally. He didn't win an election. There's no way he received 81 million real lawful American votes. He wasn't properly certified. He wasn't properly inaugurated. And then mysteriously, the Capitol was locked down for 2.5 months. In the process of overthrowing governments in other countries, what matters ultimately is whether or not the military backs one side or backs the other. We, of course, are led to believe nothing like that could ever happen in America. No one would ever attempt to overthrow the American government. And of course, why would they? It was overthrown so long ago that we didn't even notice it had been overthrown until Donald Trump came around. Some people still haven't realized it. Are we to pretend that people in the military don't know our elections are fake? If Donald Trump is a criminal and an authoritarian dictator who's seizing power after stealing an election and subverting the Constitution, having already led a very violent insurrection a few years prior, the military's just going to start doing whatever he says? Well, that can't be right. Is this just a scare tactic for the campaign so that she can win some real undecided voters? People who have started to support Donald Trump and listen to what he's actually saying, they're going to be convinced by this. They're going to say, oh no, Donald Trump is about to target Americans as the enemy within. We can't cast our real votes in this real election for Donald Trump. We're going to cast them for Kamala. Let's check in with the fake vice president's fake vice president.
Donald Trump made it very clear that this is an election about Donald Trump taking full control of the military to use against his political enemies, taking full control of the Department of Justice to prosecute those who disagree with him, taking full control of the media on what is told and what is told to the American public.
What in the world is Jazz Hands, Twinkle Toes, Tim Walz talking about? I just played Donald Trump's comments. It's clear who he's referring to. He's mentioned Adam Schiff. He's mentioned Nancy Pelosi. Both of those people are traitors to the country. Both of them were key figures in actual coups, actual subversions of the United States of America. They have nothing in common with your average bewildered Kamala Harris voter. Tim Walz is fretting that Donald Trump is going to take full control of the military and full control of the DOJ. Both of those are under his purview as president. I mean, they are, right? The president of the United States of America is the head of the executive branch, where the Department of Justice resides and the Department of Defense resides, for that matter. And he's the commander-in-chief of the military. So he already has, as president, full control of both of those entities. Now, he says Trump is going to take full control of the media as well. I don't think there's any chance that's happening, unless full control over the media means the law is actually going to be enforced. Now, I think in the future, we probably need to get to a place where there are no laws to enforce that give the government any control over media whatsoever. But to the extent that there will be laws governing how media organizations operate, enforcing those laws would not be a complete takeover of the media, unless, of course, the media was controlled by some other entity, perhaps some great global radical left machine that didn't bother following the laws because that machine controls the government, leaving them totally unaccountable. Who are they suggesting that Donald Trump is going to seize all this power from? He's going to seize all of that control through winning an election, even a contested election, contested on a constitutional basis, adjudicated according to constitutional law, rather than whatever lawfare Mark Elias can tie the courts up with while he runs out the clock so they can install the next illegitimate regime. Donald Trump has already promised that anyone engaged in any election malfeasance is going to be held accountable to the fullest extent of the law. Maybe that's what they're concerned about. Regardless, how is Donald Trump going to seize any of this power in an undue fashion from the people who are already in power, backed ostensibly by that military? I mean, Joe and Kamala, they're letting the nation know Donald Trump is going to try to seize power. Why aren't they saying they will use the military if necessary to protect the nation, while this deranged authoritarian Hitler-like wannabe dictator attempts to overthrow the government? It seems like the worry should be the other way around. Donald Trump is going to attempt to seize power in the United States of America from a regime that already controls the media, controls the finance, controls the military, and uses the Department of Justice weaponized against its political opponents? How? I mean, he's got to be backed by something, right? And it can't be the military. It's certainly the people, but that's not really enough, unless it is. He doesn't have the global governing bodies on his side. He doesn't have NATO or the UN. Joe Biden's the one who fortified all of those alliances with the European countries, and all the other countries are our adversaries that we have to be scared of. So who is going to help Donald Trump do this? I don't know. None of this makes any sense under the common understanding of how politics and government work in this country. But if you look at it through the good twin, evil twin paradigm, if you understand how countries are overthrown and how leadership is decided in other parts of the world, the actual push and pull, the actual negotiation being leveraged between sovereign nationalist leaders and this global regime, this would once again sound exactly like Venezuela. Biden in the position of Juan Guaido. The regime recognizes him as president, but he's not president. And he doesn't have control over the military. He doesn't have control over major parts of government. He's just the guy that the regime does business with and that regime allies do business with. If you are on board with the global regime agenda, then Joe Biden is your president. And of course, not really Joe Biden. Joe Biden's just the figurehead in front of the American Uniparty, and you do business with them. Perhaps they thought they could get rid of Donald Trump over these last 4 years and go right back to the Uniparty dynamic, figure out some sort of Trump-light candidate that could take Donald Trump's place, but really just push everything back to the normalcy of the Uniparty standard. But that didn't happen, and Trump is still here, and people are realizing that Joe Biden is and was a fake president, and Kamala Harris a fake vice president who can't be president, not only because she can't win any support, but because it's not a real election, and also that's not how things work. But boy, oh boy, they sure are panicked. It sounds like they think any measure of regime control that they've retained in this country is going to be removed by Donald Trump, and people are going to be held accountable. And if that's going to happen, you got to figure on some level it's already happened, knowing that he was going to allow a regime-oriented fake president to present himself as the authority in this country over the last 4 years. You can't just leave it to chance, can you? Joe Scarborough was having some trouble with this morning. They're still out there pushing that fascist thing, propping up Jeffrey Goldberg and John Kelly as the most honest and honorable men, doing a great service for America by making this stuff up about Donald Trump. They're beyond reproach. They can't be questioned. But those stories aren't the October surprises. The real October surprise was Donald Trump talking about the enemies from within. Trump October surprised himself. Morning Mika wasn't taking it well either. It's hard to tell which one is more panicked. But Morning Joe claimed Donald Trump was cozying up to foreign leaders like Vladimir Putin and Kim Jong-un and other communists. You really have to love these commies. He said Trump prefers them to the enemy from within. He's going to use the military against the enemy from within, but he pals around with Putin and Kim Jong-un. Morning Mika had a hard time, too. She was hammering on the whole fascism thing.
His cozying up to dictators, his obsession with Hitler that has now come out, what he has said about our veterans, and what he wants to do with the military against his political adversaries, it's all huge news. This is the future that we're looking at in the next Trump term, if there is one. But this is what voters know right now, that he is killing us. I'm talking about us women. He's killing us. He is putting us at risk. He is making us afraid to have babies. He is putting our reproductive health at risk, and some women have died already because of this. So we can see right now what's coming. These headlines, and very good reporting, by the way, that shouldn't be questioned by idiots about what Trump has said about Hitler, that's incredibly important to know. But I do understand that people who are busy and that are people who are just tapping in may not be able to comprehend, because we've been free. We've been comfortable. We cannot comprehend that. And I understand that. I validate that it is hard to go from here to there. It is where we're going. I hope we don't find out the hard way. But what's happening with women right now is real, and it is playing out across America.
Donald Trump, the fascist, who is literally Hitler, is literally killing women right now by not wanting them to kill their unborn babies. The people who want women to kill their unborn babies are not killing women, even though they explicitly support depopulation and eugenics and forced all those women to participate in a medical experiment that seems at least to be linked to sterilization. But Mika says she's been free. She's been comfortable. All this time, no one's ever stopped them from doing any of this. I mean, it's beginning to sound like that's what she's saying. They never had to follow the rules before. They could do whatever they wanted. They had the media. They had the finance. They had the military. They could control everything. No one was ever going to hold them accountable. It seems like that's what she's saying. Anyone tuning in, if you don't understand this, this is actually where we're headed. She seems horrified. She seems to think that she is the enemy within. And I don't think I'd argue with her about that, particularly considering who her father was and even who his father was. But let's get a voice of reason in here. This is Kash Patel. Kash said some of this on Fox News yesterday with John Roberts, but this is actually a different clip. This is Kash Patel today with Joe Pagliarulo, also known as Joe Pags.
Were exposed by the president. Remember, these guys begged to work in the Trump administration. Right. Milley, Kelly, Esper, all of them. And then when President Trump restored the civilian chain of command that the Constitution requires and President Washington set for us, they got ticked off. When he took away their nest egg in the defense industrial complex, and he said, no, I, the commander-in-chief, run the Department of Defense under civilian authorities invested in me in the Constitution. Right. They got really ticked off. And then he started looking into the corruption and saying, what's all these billion-dollar contracts, all your friends in DOD, and why is this revolving door keep opening and shutting? What happened to not having a politicized national command authority? He exposed it all. And now they're coming back with more made-up stories about Vanessa Guillen tragically digging up that and calling Trump Hitler, and that's all they got left. If Kamala Harris wants to make a press conference at the White House of the United States in the waning days of the campaign and put out vitriol, then America knows exactly the type of commander-in-chief she's going to be.
Now, I don't know exactly what Kash Patel means, but he's talking about Donald Trump bringing the military back under the control of civilian authority rather than the defense industrial complex. And I think maybe, just maybe it's possible he's talking about something a little bit bigger than that. Maybe he's talking about that global radical left machine. Some of this was discussed on last night's episode of Devolution Power Hour on the Badlands Media channel on Rumble. I would suggest you listen to that if you want to hear that discussion. But one of the things they brought up, one of the things John brings up quite often, is the speech that Ezra Cohen gave during those last days of the first Trump term. Here's a speech he gave at Fort Bragg in November of 2020.
Thank you, Jim. Mr. Secretary, on behalf of the men and women of U.S. Special Operations, especially Army Special Operations, welcome home. We are honored that you have returned to your roots on this historic day on hallowed ground. Today, the Department of Defense has started the process of formalizing what we have long known, the fundamental role of U.S. Special Operations in defense and foreign policy, by elevating Special Operations forces to a level on par with military departments as authorized and directed by Congress. As we enact these reforms, we follow the vision of President John F. Kennedy, who predicted the rise of special operations nearly 60 years ago. He foresaw, quote, another type of war, new in its intensity, ancient in its origin, that would require a whole new kind of strategy, a wholly different kind of force, forces which are too unconventional to be called conventional forces, which are growing in number and importance and significance. President Kennedy gave these remarks at the opening of the nuclear age, when the Pentagon was primarily organized to plan and direct large conventional operations against superpowers, not special operations short of overt declared conflict. The global demands for special operations forces, then and now, has confirmed President Kennedy's foresight. And now, under the leadership of President Trump, we are fully realizing President Kennedy's prescient view of special operations forces. It is fitting that we are again entering an era of great power competition as we gather to affirm the importance of the special operations community. Then as now, I know special operations forces will play a vital role, and by the historic reforms we have enacted today, we will ensure special operations forces has a civilian advocate commensurate to the secretaries of the other military departments. I am honored to serve as your service secretary. Thank you very much.
So they brought special operations and low-intensity conflict back under civilian control in the post-2020 election period, during that transition period. Seems like that might have been a substantial change. Who was running special ops before that, and at whose behest? Should we pretend that the American president was guiding special operations and low-intensity conflict, everything short of a declared war, which we haven't had in decades? We have the global governing bodies, we have the UN, we have NATO, and we have the intelligence community, particularly the Five Eyes, the CIA here in America, but the spy agencies all around the world that have existed for centuries, compromising and corrupting officials, infiltrating governments, infiltrating companies, essentially coordinating at all levels the implementation of the global agenda worldwide. You would assume they would be operating below the threshold of declared war. Again, we haven't had a declared war, but we've certainly been involved in nonstop military operations around the world. Aside from Donald Trump, we've had puppet presidents the entire time as well, who are going along with the global agenda. But you have to wonder who's really running things. What does it mean for the military to be brought back under civilian control? What does it mean for something potentially that significant to occur in the post-election period, during that transition, after the TV had told us that Donald Trump lost to Joe Biden, who received 81 million real lawful American votes? Whatever it was, the regime didn't like it. The fake president, Joe Biden, he reversed that Trump decision. This is Politico from May 5th, 2021. Austin rolls back Trump-era policy on special ops. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin is partially reversing his predecessor's last-minute decision to elevate the top civilian Pentagon official overseeing special operations matters, according to two defense officials and a memo obtained by Politico. The policy shift is mostly a bureaucratic move with the department, but continues the Biden administration's broader push to undo Trump-era policies at the Pentagon. Most recently, President Joe Biden canceled all construction projects for former President Donald Trump's southern border wall, which were paid for with money originally intended for military projects. In November, Acting Defense Secretary Chris Miller made the surprise decision to elevate the position, known as the Assistant Secretary for Special Operations / Low Intensity Conflict, to report directly to the Defense Secretary. After reviewing the change, Austin is moving the position back down to the Pentagon's policy shop, but it will still retain a direct reporting line to him on administrative issues such as training, manning, and equipping, according to two Pentagon officials who requested anonymity to discuss the topic ahead of an announcement. How about that? Pentagon officials who will go talk to Politico to publicize a Pentagon announcement before the Pentagon actually announces it. Thank goodness we don't have a deep state, or I'd worry that this would be the sort of thing they do. The change will be, quote-unquote, effective immediately, according to a Wednesday memo signed by Austin that lays out the shift. Biden last month announced his intent to nominate Christopher Mayer, who served as the director of the Trump administration's Pentagon task force to defeat the Islamic State, for the job. They note that Politico first reported that Austin was considering reversing the Trump move back in February, so 3 months before, right as the illegitimate Biden administration was just getting its feet wet in a fenced-off Washington, D.C. Capitol. And how interesting. The guy who ran the Pentagon task force under Trump to finally eliminate ISIS that had been started by Joe's old boss, that guy was appointed Assistant Secretary for Special Operations and Low-Intensity Conflict. Miller's policy change, announced 8 days after Trump fired Defense Secretary Mark Esper, put civilian oversight of the special operations community on par with the civilian leaders of the military branches for the first time. Now, that was supposed to happen with the Nunn-Cohen Amendment of the National Defense Authorization Act in 1987, all the way back in the Reagan era. And then after that, we had George Herbert Walker Bush, who used to be CIA director, old corrupt and compromised Slick Willie Clinton, then George W. Bush, and then Obama. But it finally happened once Trump came around. Wow. The move was seen as a way to promote the needs of America's elite special operations forces, such as Navy SEALs, Army Green Berets, and Marine Raiders. Miller is a former Green Beret. The effort stemmed from experts' assessment that civilian oversight of the special operations community had not kept pace with its size and scope, which has ballooned since the 9/11 attacks. This meant that military commanders, especially the head of Special Operations Command, end up making critical decisions that should be made by civilian leaders, for example, on budget issues, experts argued. Ah, yes, just budget issues, I'm sure. Unlike many Trump-era decisions, such as banning transgender people from serving in the military or sending troops to the border wall, the decision to elevate the special operations role was not controversial. Experts and lawmakers have called for greater civilian oversight of the community in recent years, particularly after the fatal ambush of U.S. Special Forces in Niger in 2017 and a series of scandals that have plagued the Navy SEAL community. Austin's decision will keep the Special Operations position in a service secretary-like role for administrative matters, such as dealing with sexual assault and increasing diversity, the officials said. The position will retain the designation of Principal Staff Assistant, a change established by Miller. The person will also continue to participate in senior leader meetings with the Defense Secretary, the Deputy, and the Service Secretaries. But on other matters, such as broader policies regarding counterterrorism and irregular warfare, the official will report to the Pentagon Policy Chief, the official said. Ezra Cohen, who served in the special operations job on an acting basis under Trump, defended Miller's change, saying that an independent SOLIC will not diminish policy coordination, but rather allow the position to be singularly focused on their statutory responsibility of providing civilian oversight of special operations forces. He also indicated that the move to split the position's responsibilities is misguided, noting that the, quote, dual reporting chain while simultaneously meeting congressional intent is not proven, end quote. The change is not a demotion, one of the officials said, rather an optimization of the reform Miller initiated. In particular, the person said the move to make the special operations role a principal staff assistant is a quote-unquote sea change for the community. The second official noted that while Miller initiated the change, it was not fully implemented until recently. The official stressed that Austin decided to keep the good parts of Miller's change, including the principal staff assistant designation and inclusion in senior level meetings. However, the defense secretary ultimately decided to tweak the placement of the position outside the policy shop. In Austin's view, this is in line with what lawmakers intended when they first mandated the 2017 Defense Policy Bill that the official overseeing special operations matters report directly to the secretary, the official said. The change will not affect oversight of operational decisions, the official said, noting that most Special Operations Forces missions are approved through the geographic combatant commanders with input from the policymakers. The news that Austin is moving special operations back under the policy shop marks just the latest reversal of Trump Pentagon policies. Biden recently reversed Trump's ban on transgender people serving in the military and ordered 500 additional troops to Germany instead of moving forward with Trump's planned cuts to the U.S. presence there. Austin also ousted a number of last-minute Trump appointees to the Pentagon's advisory board in January. So it sounds like they're just basically moving around the furniture on an administrative level and not actually reversing the substantive change made by Christopher Miller at the end of that first Trump term. There's a lot to this. We're going to keep pulling at this thread, but it's very interesting. And I think it helps to explain some of this widespread meltdown over what the military is supposedly going to do to American citizens. Now, their panic seems quite real, but the things they're saying are nonsensical, and they have to know they're nonsensical. So they're either lying for a reason, or they're honestly expressing themselves about issues whose context they are not willing to communicate. It seems like maybe they've realized they're running out of time. I will be back tomorrow at the same reasonable time on the same reasonable podcast network. I don't have a network. Masks and lockdowns don't work. They lied to you about a pandemic. And Joe Biden will never be president.
In my mind, that's the end game.
If you're listening for free and would like to support the show, the best way to do that is by signing up for a paid subscription at imyourmoderator.substack.com. You can find the info stream over on Telegram at t.me/veryreasonable. The merch site is cancelcouture.com. And for all my other links, you can visit linktree.com/imyourmoderator. And I'll see you soon. Down on the range.